Okay, good evening all, and welcome to the UWL Alumni Engage with Juile Lawal. I'm your host, Huda Ismail, Head of Placement and Employment Service here at the University of West London. Now, this event is part of a series of Alumni Engage events, which will host a variety of topics, and this particular event focuses on practical ways we can develop a resilient mindset whilst building our career. So we have turned off mics and cameras to this event, but please use the Q&A box to ask any questions and we will try to read them during the session. As part of the alumni community, you have access to the Lifetime Career Service here at the University of West London. You just need to register your details at studenthub.uwl.ac.uk and you'll be able to book face-to-face virtual appointments and directly with our careers consultants and explore a range of opportunities. So as part of the week, this is the Business, Computing and Engineering Careers Week. And Julie, you're an alumnus of the School of Computing and Engineering. So you've enjoyed an exceptional career, holding many senior roles across tech and pharmaceutical industries. And you've also had a pivot to your career where you started your own business right from the ground up, which included an award-winning book called The Online Lifestyle. And you've also become a trusted mentor and a sought-after inspirational speaker, a mindset coach, and an educator. Lots of titles. So just to start off, how would you be able to describe, kind of in a nutshell, your career to date?
Well, thank you first of all for the warm welcome, and hello to everybody watching and dialing in this evening. It's good to be here. So it all started with my degree at University of West London a little while ago now, but I studied information management and I partnered that with publishing studies. So that gave me a good broad business background with some computing elements. And so by the time it came to graduate and do the finals and get your results, it was equally exciting and terrifying to then go into the world of work and you know, coming out of academic world into commerce. So I began my degree as a marketing assistant, actually, in a further education college. And it was 1993, and it was a year of recession. So it was actually quite hard to position yourself in the jobs market. And so really that was the first lesson learned of things not necessarily going to plan. But I didn't let that discourage me because I really wanted the experience. I needed to get out there in the big wide world. And I learned a lot from that first job about working with people, applying my degree into the working world and finding my way.
I think that's really interesting because you mentioned the recession. Obviously, we've had the 2008 recession and with COVID most recently, that's kind of made a lot of either recent graduates and not so recent graduates kind of rethink their career and have to pivot. So it's interesting that even though you experience that, you know, that's something that's still reoccurring. And I think it's the changing our environment that we don't necessarily have any control over, which I think is really fascinating.
That's so true. That's so true. Change is the constant. So any career you're planning for yourself or ideas that you have in life in general, let's face it, it's all subject to change. Organizations change, the economy changes, market drivers and forces change the whole time. And so companies and individuals within those companies and organizations frequently have to pivot and embrace it and not be too scared of it. And I think as my career progressed, changing industries, moving roles and jobs, moving up to more senior positions, this becomes even more important because you then have people working in your teams and in your departments looking to you for reassurance. So there's a lot of another common theme throughout my career has been, what do I need to do to be mindful of my own personal development and my own role in this thing that we call change and evolution? Because that certainly challenges your thinking. And even if you're feeling a bit of the swell yourself, can't let that worry or further add anxiety to people around you in the workplace.
Absolutely.
So yes,
I think one thing that that's come to me from, you know, your discussion in your career, is that careers aren't linear. So just because you know, studied a particular subject, I mean, your first role out of university wasn't actually technically what you studied. And I think for current students and at least recent graduates, that's probably something to bear in mind in terms of the pressure of studying a particular course. You know, I must find my first job out there, and it's not necessarily, you know, you still can build up a lot of employability skills, you know, in lots of areas as you're starting off, and may be able to then pivot into your industry. So because I think there is a lot of pressure being a current student, being a graduate, particularly in the environment that we're in now, and you know, to be able to, you know, understand that not to put as much pressure on you, I guess. And maybe that ties into resilience and the theme of resilience.
Yes, absolutely, because you're right, in as much as the role marketing department, marketing assistant wasn't a natural, obvious first step on the career ladder. However, there was opportunity for me once I settled in, for me to think, okay, so I do know something about computing. I've just spent 3 years learning about all of the this kind of thing. And when I went into the workplace, I mean, bearing in mind, this is 1993, so tech has moved on significantly since then. I was in an environment that wasn't so tech advanced. And yet I knew, having just come out of university, where we had good facilities in the computer labs, I thought to myself, well, that's really weird. Why are they using all this stuff when they could be doing it this whole other way? And so that really was my opening gambit, really, because then that led into interests that took me down the procurement avenue, which I then built on later in life. So I think you can always find an opportunity or a way to leverage. Just hold your nerve. And I think that's where the resilient comes in. There will be something, you've got to be open and look for it, and then find your way from there. And you can layer on things. I mean, as you say, you know, what you choose to start with, you don't have to be there forever. It's not your forever choice. And actually that applies to all subsequent career choices you might make. It's not forever. If within the first little while it's not what you think, you've always got choices. There's always a choice. But companies, people, situations, they're all there for a reason in your life. And so they're either there to put wind under your wings and lift you up, or it's there to teach you a lesson. So that's always something to be mindful of. And that's what I found in my career as well. So,
I mean, we discussed a little bit about kind of starting off in your career, you know, for a community that, you know, has had a significant amount of experience, but is looking to change. That's kind of a different prospect, because you've already potentially established yourself, you know, you have a stable income, and there's a lot of risk with kind of making that pivot. So I guess, would it be a similar mindset in terms of how would you adapt to those kinds of changes, I guess, maybe, or are the themes still the same in terms of motivation and being resilient if you are a little further on in your career, and you may potentially have to make a pivot and change into something that could be completely different, or something that maybe has been a side hobby that's now kind of that you may be interested in taking on a more full-time basis?
Yes, I think there's always challenge within a pivot, and you get to a point in life, and it hits us all at different times, of what really is my true purpose, what gives me joy, what do I feel fulfilled by, and where is my true value and contribution in life, really. And of course, the older you get, you've got more responsibilities. That's the only thing that changes, because you have, you know, the bills to pay, family to look after, and probably, you know, the generation either side of you, you know, the consideration for parents as well as for children, perhaps. And so the sorts of decisions you make might just need more careful consideration. And I think what I found in my own experience, and by talking to other people, a lot of the fear or the knee-jerk reactions come from the relationship people have with money. And does one have enough cushioning to just tide you over? And so many people have faced this struggle, particularly in the last year and a half through COVID, of course. So I think if my advice to my younger self when I was first starting out at work would be put all those good foundations and good financial habits in place right from the get-go. Don't do what I did when I was 22 and think, oh, pensions are for old people. I'm 22. What do I need a pension for? I would certainly go back to that 22-year-old self and have a very different conversation. But, you know, it's things like that. It's getting the foundations right. But that said, how can I put it? It's if you're open to learning, and we're in a learning community, so I feel sure that listeners are, be curious. Always use that curious muscle. And for me, what I did things in parallel. So I didn't just throw in the towel. I had a side hobby first because I had to explore, felt I wanted to explore the ideas first. And then that way you're not taking those reckless risks. You feel like you're doing it a bit more in a progressive way, incremental way. And also you might find that part of the pivot is learning about yourself and doing the inner work. Huge amount of all of that. And then second of all, is really how do people want to engage with you? And just because you think, oh, I know, I could do that thing I'm really good at work, I'll package that up and find a way to sell that to help either individuals or companies. And that's fine. But unless you've tested the idea out first, how do you know that's what people actually want to buy or want to do? So there's lots of, and of course in the academic world, you are used to testing out theories, and in the working world, you're used to testing out theories, especially in science and tech. So in some ways, if these kind of realizations are coming to you later in your career when you want to pivot, you're in a better place because you've got that experience of experimenting. You've got the experience that working in whatever role you have or have had, it's all valuable experience. And always remember, nobody else has your exact experience. There's only one of you.
I think that's really important to remember. And I think just off the back of that, I think what's really great about the University of West London is that we are the career university, but off having a lifetime career service that's just it. Careers aren't linear, and there will be points in your life where you may want to research or kind of look at different areas, but we as an institution, you do have that support available to you as an alumni. So even though you feel that you may have graduated and passed the graduate schemes and things like that, it's always important to research and reach out, because there is a support here available. So I think it is really interesting, because a lot of the work that we do with current students as well, some who have registered to this event also, is to some of the themes that you've said, find out where your skill sets are, find out what you're passionate about, and look at your industry, look at the market where you want to tap into. How important, I guess, was researching your area before you kind of took that leap? I know you mentioned that you had it as a side hobby initially, and it was it was a slow incremental kind of phasing into something that you wanted to do full time. I guess how much time and research, I guess, went into it, and how did that impact your full-time work in the particular areas that you were in tech and then pharmaceuticals?
I've always been a driven individual, I think. So I've always been someone who's done goal setting throughout my life, and always had I don't just drift, I have goals. So that's really important to know where you're going and what you want to do. So that's one thing I would say. But mainly with this area in particular is intuition, because many years in industry has taught me many lessons, good and bad. But I think any lesson is good, actually. If you can learn the lesson, it's a good experience to have. And what I noticed for women in science and tech industries, and maybe another layer of just working in big organizations, and I've worked mostly in the big Fortune 500 type of companies, is that not everybody plays nicely in organizations. And so that can have a detrimental effect on you as an individual. And I think there's many challenges I'm sure equally for men as there are for women, but of course I only have the experience from the female side. But there's many challenges in getting promotions, breaking through the glass ceiling, getting into these types of industries and so on in the first place. And there's a lot of competition. And for the most part, it's healthy competition. But there are some undercurrents from time to time. And so what I noticed, I thought, wow, if people could have some sort of realization or do some more reflection and realize that if you just tweak your mindset and behavior, probably only 1 or 2 degrees, the outcome of what you would achieve with that team or that department could just exponentially go through the roof. And sometimes people get so wrapped up in, but I know I'm right, my way is the best way, why aren't they doing it this way? And you miss out on all sorts of conversations and input that's far more inclusive by just stepping away, almost taking yourself out of your own way to be more inclusive. And so it was all driven from personal experience of, I want to help people be better leaders of themselves. And if you're a better leader of yourself, you're a better person to be around for your team, you know, your colleagues, bosses, people that report to you. And even it extends to your own family and friends as well, because of course we can't really truly separate ourselves from work and social activities. So that was my drive. And part of that journey though is self-discovery, because then I had to hold the mirror up to myself. And that's an uncomfortable place sometimes, because to do some of these self-development exercises, I'm sure you've come across some of these in the past, in various forms, whether they're personality tests or it's journaling or, you know, these kind of things, you do have to be brutally honest with yourself. It's like, okay, let's get it out there, let's address it. And we're work in progress our whole working lives. So the important thing is to do the self-reflection and see where you can improve. And in my case, help provide a way to share that with other people, because so many people struggle in life and in work. And we're here really to help each other, and none of us can do anything by ourselves. So for me, it's important to get that community and that glue, if you like, working well.
One of the things that you've mentioned, which is interesting and kind of leads into motivation, is that you had to have a lot of drive into it. And just before I ask another question, I do want to remind the audience that there is the Q&A box. So if you do have any questions throughout this session, please do use the Q&A box available to you to ask them. But it's interesting with drive and motivation, because a lot of confidence, you know, comes through that, and how to navigate that and understand. And you know, when it's self-reflecting, I think there's a lot of skills that you build in with life experience, with work experience. I'm a huge advocate for kind of getting as much diverse work experience as possible, because that's how you find out what you enjoy and that's what you like, and then you can possibly find out that you don't actually like the experience, which is just as relevant, I feel, for your future. But I guess it's how to maintain the confidence to be able to, you know, stay motivated and have that kind of mindset to keep trying, because, you know, particularly for certain industries, or, you know, where you've applied and applied and applied. For us, what we try and share with our students, our current students and our alumni, you know, with job applications, is that it's not necessarily the first job that you may get. You know, you may get through certain stages, and if you don't get it, then kind of feedback and understanding, you know, where possibly the reason why you didn't get it is kind of useful as well, because you kind of learn and you pick up as you go along, and you know. But I guess my way, taking it back to motivation, I think is really important, and how to stay motivated and confident within yourself, because I think there's a lot of skills that you do have that you might not necessarily be aware of, where you don't take it, you know, take it for granted, but don't really think about it.
Well, that's right, because something comes easy to you, you don't even think about it. So you assume everybody has that skill or that way of doing things, and that's absolutely not the case. So that's why self-reflection is important. And And it's an interesting point you raise about the setbacks in job applications, because you get that throughout your career. So that's just something you have to accept as part of life. And unfortunately, despite a highly computerized and automated age, although a lot of these application processes go through various recruitment portals, doesn't necessarily mean to say, unfortunately, that you would get feedback. So one technique that I use, and perhaps listeners might also find helpful, is an exercise that you can do is just sit down on what you can type it or write it, however you prefer doing this, and you just list achievements that you're proud of in your life, from early childhood through your teens, 20s, anytime, and it can be anything. So even getting through university, huge achievement, passing your driving test, learning a language, perhaps you play a musical instrument, maybe you did a Duke of Edinburgh award, you name it, actually, whatever you can do. And the reason why that's important is because no matter what, you always can look at your 100 achievements, and they're personal to you, and they mean something because you had to put in some effort. You had to find the cash to do the course, or whatever it is, or your family supported you to enable you to do that. And so it's hugely important for your self-esteem as well. So no matter that you didn't get into the company for that job that you thought you really pinned all your hopes and dreams on, it just means the timing's not right now. That doesn't mean to say you can never get into that company. And
absolutely.
I do believe that the universe, and it might sound a bit woo-woo for any scientists on the call, I appreciate this, but I really do believe that the universe has ways to signal where you need to be in life. And you're either ready for it or you're not. And you might just need to do a bit more learning or a bit more growing. Or it's like when you're a child and you have clothes handed down to you. Did anybody else have that? And you've got to grow into it a bit, right? So it's like growing into, you've got to grow into that coat.
Yeah.
And then you're ready for leveling up to that next role or to that next stage in life.
One thing in my experience that I found interesting with employees and feedback, and I've got a question for you that I'll ask after this, is really I mean, we speak to employees all the time, and we ask, what are you looking for? And the technical skills for roles generally aren't as important as the social skills. So either leadership or working independently, or team working skills, communication skills, and those are things that you will have just out of your experience. Again, if you were to do group projects at university, for example, and you were to present as part of your assignment, that's presentation skills. It's like, I think it's thinking back to the skills or writing skills or analytical skills, if that was part of your degree, depending on what degree you have. I think there's a lot of things, and I guess it's understanding where that, and having the confidence, I guess, to also take a risk and apply for things that you might not think that, not letting imposter syndrome or any of this kind of mindset that you may not be good enough. Because I think a lot of the times it is some of the non-technical skills that employees kind of want to look at, because from the technical side, obviously that those are things that are ongoing, and that you will develop in your career. And I think with training and learning and development, no matter what position you're in, even in leadership positions, there's always training that's available. And I think if you look at your career as not being kind of set as linear, and because you're in a certain position, you're not necessarily going to have to retrain. COVID's played a massive part of that, because a lot of things everyone has had to figure out Zoom and how to work online and manage meetings online. And there's a lot of things that have changed as a result. And I guess maybe being adaptable to that. Yes, exactly. Really important.
That's all part of resilience, really. And you've touched on an interesting point. Over the span of my career, what I've noticed a significant shift, and in particular in recent years, is this move away from the technical skills checklist. Can you create a PowerPoint presentation? That's probably not a good example, but you get the idea. And more recently, it's definitely about mindsets and behaviors, how you go about working with people, interacting with people, being the leader in the workplace. And less emphasis on the technical skills. It's almost assumed that you do have technical skills. It's assumed that since university, you've added other strings to your bow, whether that's certification in project management, change management, Scrum, and all these agile methodologies that are now prevalent in life, because the speed and pace of change in organizations is just so fast now, if I compare now to when I first started my career. And so all these things are really important. You know, how can you demonstrate flexibility? How can you show your strength? How can you also show that you're empathetic? Because empathy is well, you might be surprised to learn, you might not, but empathy is sometimes quite often missed out. And remember as well, when you're applying for jobs and you look down the list and you think, oh gosh, can I really do that? 30% for sure I can, but how am I going to answer the rest? Always remember experience that you've gained when you've taken time out, experience that you have from perhaps you volunteer in some capacity, or you've just done some other form of unpaid work. It all counts, because there would have been something somewhere that you did that made a difference. It can be something as simple as that you're just really good at putting people at their ease. And when I've been the one in global meetings where it's represented internationally across geographies and regions, where language is a barrier, that is a tremendously useful skill to be able to have. As a for example, because most of my roles have been not UK based exclusively. And people listening today may find that they're either in roles or going into roles in global companies where you deal with Asia, North America, Canada, Latin America, you know, all these interesting mixes. So just think of all these other experiences you've had. I mean, maybe you took a year out traveling and you went backpacking, not in the recent year and a half, admittedly. But maybe I don't know, maybe you took 3 months in Africa on a project to help build a school with, you know, for the local village. All these things are hugely important, because you would have had a time where you faced a difficulty, because this is how we get to how do we cope with resilience. Something difficult showed up for us, and how did we respond to that? Because we each of us have events that happen in life. The key to it is, how did you respond to it to get to the outcome? So it's the response to stuff that happens is what's unique to you, and this is how you tease out, what am I really good at? Why do I make a difference to organizations or other people, etc.?
Speaking of challenges, one of the questions that has come through is in regards to your roles in leadership. So how easily that came to you? You know, did you have to improve or work to improve on any skill sets and so on? And did your leadership skills come naturally to you? And were there any challenges, if any?
That is an excellent question. So thank you to the person who dropped that one in the Q&A box. Nothing comes easily. It all requires work. So that's the spoiler alert, I'm sorry to say, for everybody. There is no shortcut. That said, the key really for me is to, in my experience, if I look back over my career, was being open to looking for the opportunity in the first place, not giving up if I didn't get that opportunity on the first go, and listening to feedback from people around me, even if it was people I didn't particularly like or respect. The gift of feedback is still useful if it's provided in a constructive way, because it gives you clues. And I can give some examples of this to expand a bit further. I mentioned before that I'm quite driven and I have goals, so I've always known what my end goal is. doesn't necessarily mean I had all the steps mapped out. So sometimes it means you have to go sideways to go up, or you might even have to go back down a layer or two because you just don't have experience in, I'm making it up, say finance. And maybe it's not your favorite topic either, but in business, you need to be good with budgets. So you have to be humble in recognizing that there are just going to be disciplines or areas or stuff you don't know about yet. You just haven't come across it. And so it might set you back 6 months or 12 months because you think, I really felt I was ready for that position and I got knocked back. And you might take a day or two to reflect on that or think, oh, that's just so disappointing. Never give up. If your goal is to, if you've got your clear goal and you just feel driven to, that's what I need to do, hold on to it and don't let anybody tell you you can't achieve it, because you can. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not easy for anyone. They might make it look easy and it might appear easy, but there's a lot of work. It's a bit like a swan swimming along on the river. They just look like they're gliding on a remote control, but they're pedaling away. So
yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of work that goes on to just stick with it.
Yeah. And just another point that's come in. Could you expand a little bit more about the gift of feedback?
I frame it that way because this is a big reflection piece for me in recent years. At the time when I was young and a bit hot-headed and perhaps a bit too big for my boots on some occasions, there was some feedback that I didn't care to listen to. And that's because I didn't appreciate it in as much as the intent behind it, because the intent when people give you feedback is they want to help you improve. Sometimes it comes across a bit clumsily, and that's why you feel a bit of a how dare they kind of reaction. But it's actually a gift, because without somebody saying something to you, then you're never going to stop and think. Some feedback I've had earlier on in my career, I've only just realized, 15 years later, oh, that's what they meant by that. So it doesn't always make sense at the time either. So that's what I mean by the gift of feedback. And as I said, if it's done in a constructive and helpful way, but I now know that the intent behind feedback is that people are trying to help you.
I'm just going to go back into the Q&A box. Sure. This is from a future graduate. So good afternoon or evening, really, Julie. How can we future graduates overcome setbacks or challenges regarding productive work experience as a key element for the job requirement? So, for example, accountancy. So if you find that possibly you're not getting kind of as much work experience in a particular area, that's my understanding of, or my interpretation of your question. How would you overcome that? And I think it speaks back to a lot of that we've discussed previously in terms of resilience and motivation, and possibly stepping sideways before moving into it, because you, like you initially said, started off in a marketing area, but you used your current environment to kind of scope out, as it were, kind of an opportunity that was more aligned with your degree.
Yes, exactly. It is challenging, but it's not impossible. And so I can share some examples of how I think through these things and how I've done it for myself, and hopefully it helps the person who asked the question. There's always opportunity in whatever you can do. So if you're able to get experience in another, I don't know whether field is the right word, but from another angle, don't forget you've always got your higher faculties, if you like, of intuition, creativity, imagination. How else can you demonstrate to future employers that you're a good egg? Just because you've taken a different path? Because nothing is irrelevant if you think about, if you're intentional about what you're doing. And I don't know the particular circumstance, but if somebody is trying to go into a big accountancy firm or one of the top 5 consultancies and they're looking for XYZ and you haven't got it, don't be put off by that, because you don't, first of all, you can't compare yourself to all the other candidates who they're taking consideration. You simply don't know what you're up against. And if you beat yourself up by imagining or trying to compare yourself, well, they've probably got this, they've got that, I haven't, what, you just spiral down and you lose sight of your own self-worth. And remember, the technique I mentioned a little earlier is write down those 100 things. You won't get them right off the bat in one sitting, by the way. It'll take a day or two. but do remember what you can do. And maybe the experience can be obtained by working for a small business on a voluntary basis. You've got access to LinkedIn. Who can you reach out to on LinkedIn? And the Alumni is a great starting point. Just search for people who are in this community. How can you help them? Can you do some good solid work for people in your network? And if you haven't got a network yet, think about, well, how can I start to build that up? So for anybody listening, if you're not on LinkedIn already, create a profile and get going, because you've got all of your University of West London
Absolutely.
odds to make a start.
I would say that, and actually one of the services with the career service is actually they help to run LinkedIn sessions and how to use LinkedIn for professional networking. I'm a huge advocate for that. And also use your current network. So if you worked in retail, for example, if you worked in the hospitality industry, you know, use your networks internally, find out where the corporate office is, find out if you can. It's much easier networking from within than from outside in. But yes, as you said as well, Julie, like use your alum, you know, and not to be afraid to reach out to people. You never know what feedback you are going to get, and if you don't get feedback, that's fine. But you may well get feedback.
Yes, you have to expect a certain amount of no responses or a handful of no's. But if you reframe that happening and say, right, today my goal is I'm going to get 5 more no's on my list. And if you get 5 more rejections, you say, yes, I've achieved my goal. Just turn it around. And then eventually you'll get a yes, because as you say, you get more used to, it's scary in the beginning. I totally get that, to reach out to somebody and say, I really would like to offer you this service, and this is why I'm passionate about this, or why I'm interested in this. How can I always come from a position of how can I serve you, and not think about it, what can I get from you? Because I don't know how to explain that really. It always comes across better when it's from a place of service and giving. And yes, you might have to do some time or some projects or some activities on an unpaid basis, but don't knock it, because if you're after the experience and you get that experience and you just get something going, it's still worth it.
And so just going back to being true to yourself and being very intentional, have you, I mean, we discussed this in some ways, but have you ever had to fake it, quote unquote, or have you always been true to yourself? I guess that could be interpreted in lots of different ways, I guess, when we're discussing about looking at roles and feeling like, you know, you may not be qualified. Do you feel like a lot of that could be down to confidence, or maybe things like imposter syndrome, as opposed to faking it? Because I think, for me personally, I think it is about taking the risk and learning as you go along, because we all learn, and no one ever starts off kind of knowing 100% of your role, whatever level, you know, you go in at. So your feedback, I guess your perspective would be really useful in terms of the idea of faking it and being true to yourself.
Yes, it's another good question, because you hear that phrase a lot, fake it till you make it. And personally, that doesn't resonate with me, because my values are about integrity, honesty, and being transparent. And they always have been. And so for me, it's really important to be upfront right off the bat, to say, well, that's not an area I am experienced in yet, but I am interested in, you know, you always have to do your research. So always say what aspect of that still interests you and motivates you to learn more. Always demonstrate that if that's true for you, and re-emphasize all the qualities you do have that you would lean on and tap into to enable you to be successful in that other area. I think for me, another way to think about this fake it till you make it or imposter syndrome is to write affirmations. And already, I don't know whether this is something people have come across before, but what it does, it gives you confidence in that new area. So for example, if you're not a head of department yet and you really want to be, you just tell yourself, you know, you act as if, so you're not lying about it. It's the language and the way that you talk to yourself about that is different to faking it till you're making it. Because when I've seen fake it till you make it, I've seen people blatantly lie about their competencies, and that's very different.
Yeah.
Because in business, if you're not genuine and authentic and do the right thing, you will get found out. So if that's the reputation you want to build for yourself, remember your career spans 30, 40 years. If that's the reputation you want to build for yourself, that's fine. If you want to be more authentic and genuine and true to yourself and treat other people how you want to be treated, then you have to be, in my opinion and in my experience, more honest and transparent and open about that from the get-go. And there's all these resources, as you've mentioned, you know, in university and in life. If you're curious and you stay open to learning and growing and reading articles, magazines, academic, or the business pages, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah, there's so many resources available to you. And I think with the rise of technology and access to pages like LinkedIn, for example, there are always, I think if there are areas, you know, that interest you, that you want to learn a bit more information, even if you don't technically have the experience, I think we do hold a lot of careers resource. I'm going to keep plugging the careers service because I think it's so useful, particularly for this topic. And I think because it's such a journey, it doesn't matter where you are in the stage in the career, you can always come back and get a bit more information and advice and guidance. And we do have specialized careers consultants in various areas. So on the flip side, I'm just kind of going back to the Q&A. So if we have one from a recent graduate in the education sector who is a mature student, so has kind of years of interpersonal experience, empathy, motivation to make a difference in the sector, but technical skills has been a challenge. And how would you deal with kind of a lack of support whilst working with younger colleagues, I guess, around the area of building technical skills? So possibly someone who already has developed it through life and work experience, but not necessarily the technical side of it.
So if I understand the question correctly, it's like, in essence, how do you build those technical skills to support your success in your job? Well, for me, it's a couple of things, actually. First of all, it's a good place to start that you recognize there's a gap, because that's always the first point to start with. Like, where am I now? What am I supposed to be doing in my job, and where do I need to be? So if that gap is around technical skills, at least you've got that far. And then after that, it's then deciding, well, so say you need to be a bit more skilled in project management, and you just need to do that as an example. Where do you go from there? So could your employer support you doing the project management course? Yes or no? And it's a few £1,000s investment, so they may or may not. It depends on their policies. If they don't, and it's really important to you, personally, I don't necessarily wait for my employer to sign me off to do a course. I will do it myself if I believe in it that strongly and that I need that. There's other places you can look, like LinkedIn Learning, for example, where you can upskill for the workplace. And again, I think it's just be aware of your community. Who do you know in your personal network? Who, if we stick with this example of project management skills, who do you know who is doing a role like that? Can they coach you on a Saturday morning? Can you go and meet them from a coffee? Can they explain it to you? Always leverage people the jobs they have. People, your friends and connections will help you, even if it's just to point you in the right direction. So I would say, for me personally, I've never relied wholeheartedly on my employer ever. I've taken some ownership of, well, what can I do? Who do I know? who can I have a half an hour conversation with to help plug this gap? And I think one of the main differences between academia and coming out of university and going into work is this very point, collaboration. Because when you sit down and do an exam for your finals, you're on your own. I get that. Nobody else can physically write your exam paper for you, of course. But in the world of work and in life, we have connections. We can have conversations. We can own up to say things like, I recognize I have some competence in that area. I'm familiar with it up to this point. I will take ownership of myself and my learning, and this is what I'm going to do. And just brainstorm, just draw on paper. I use mind mapping. I don't know, perhaps that's a tool you're familiar with. You just draw little bubbles and link. What can you link together? What resources do you have? Hopefully that helps answer that question.
I've got 2 questions, so I'm going to link them into one. So you mentioned briefly your experiences being a woman in the workplace, particularly in leadership roles. So, have you faced any challenges being a woman in the workplace? And if so, how have you overcome them? And have you personally ever suffered from imposter syndrome?
Oh, yes. I'd be lying if I said no. Yes, imposter syndrome is a thing for most people. I think the aspect of that would vary between people is how well do you have that handled, and do you let it derail you, and do you let that little inner voice just carry on, or do you just say thank you, I'm carrying on with where I was? But for sure, yes, yes, had many challenges. I've had many situations where I know I've been challenged because I'm a woman saying that in a technical job about a technical thing, and about specifically a technical fix for a technical problem. So for sure, I've had instances of those experiences, and I haven't let it, in the heat of the moment, all sorts of things would have been going through my mind. But the technique is to really just be as composed as you can in what comes out. And sometimes silence is a response. And, just to take that pause, take that deep breath, because breathing does do things to your system to calm you down, as I'm sure people are aware of that technique on the call. And just pause. And don't make a bad situation worse for yourself. Because for some reason, has anybody else noticed this? Sometimes you can just make it worse for yourself by blurting out something in the heat of the moment. Yeah. So the technique I've learned is to breathe, pause, then respond, and even just say, if you feel like you're being cornered or pushed, just say to people, if you have a guardrail that says, I'm not getting dragged into this now, I will come back to you later. That's what you need to share with people. So yes, I've been challenged, but when I have felt that, how I have dealt with it is I've always had an end customer in mind. So when I'm in these situations, there's a patient at the end of it, or there's an end user, or there's some form of a customer, and they don't know I'm acting on behalf of them in these project team meetings or in this situation where a technical fix is required for something. I think if you can develop the technique of put that person you're there to serve ultimately in mind, is it still important that you stick with that point to really do the best that you can for the person who really needs it? And so by switching the emphasis from yourself to the ultimate customer, that's also a good technique to develop, is it just also takes some of the potential heat out of the situation.
So you spoke briefly about empathy and the importance of empathy, and one of the questions that's come through is, do you think it's impossible for some people to learn how to empathize? It's quite a big question.
It is quite a big question. It might be, and it's something I've been reading a lot about over the years, because some people don't have the empathy thing. I don't know how to describe it. And yet some people have it so much so. And probably if you think about people who are faith healers or perhaps people in religious or spiritual roles, coaches, this kind of thing, they do feel what other people feel, so that, which means they just pick up on somebody's having a bad day, or she's really happy today, I wonder what's gone on, you've got some news to share. And this skill is hugely overlooked, or it can be hugely overlooked in the workplace, because if you have that, people remember that. And in my experience as well, I did have this myself. I just didn't realize how big an impact I had on a department based in the US until 9 or 10 months after the fact. And it was just a difficult time that the organization had to work through. You had to find your way to get through it. And I remember thinking, well, it can't be pleasant for them. If I was them, how would I feel about that? How would I feel about somebody from the UK coming over to the US and saying, this is what you need to do? So the more that, and again, linked to the point I made a moment ago, the more you can put yourself in the other person's shoes, the better, because that person came back to me many months later and said, I really appreciate the time you spent with me. I realize it was in the nighttime for you because you're in the UK, we're in the US. I know you put yourself out for me and you didn't have to. Whereas I was thinking, this isn't a good situation for them. What can I do to help them? And so I don't know whether that's a good example to describe that, but not everybody would.
I think empathy can be used in a really positive way in the working environment, because it contributes to your communication skills, it contributes to team building, it contributes to relationship management. And no matter what kind of role you are in, those skills are useful. And I guess maybe speaking back to your earlier points of thinking about other skills that you can, that you may not necessarily think of. And I think we're all on a spectrum, so there will be some people who don't display as much empathy and others that display a lot more, and it's just like other areas. Some people may be confident in team management or communication and not so much, and we all kind of learn from it. So I think there's always something to be able to learn from.
Absolutely. And I think the more you can empathize with the human condition, and that everybody is on a journey through life. We've all had different backgrounds, upbringing, education. Even if you've been on the exact same degree course as the person next to you, you're still two very different people. And so in business and in life, as you were saying, the more that you can just pause and just be aware of what's going on around you. Everyone has got their own struggles and dealing with, that they're dealing with imposter syndrome, or they're struggling with confidence or self-esteem, or similar to you, and maybe you're a little 1 or 2 steps ahead, or you're discovering more about yourself, and perhaps that it doesn't really matter. It's not a competition. The important thing really is just to be aware. There's a reason why you've got two ears and one mouth, so always be listening and tuning into what's going around you.
I've got one final question before we start to wrap up. So we've discussed a lot of kind of recent graduates and people maybe moving on further in their career and with career changes. So I guess, and it's a bit tricky, if you've had someone who's potentially overqualified and that's the feedback that maybe they're receiving as part of the kind of rejection or not being successful in particular roles that they're applying for, because it's slightly different to being on the other end of the spectrum with trying to build experience. I guess how would one kind of manage that? If there's a particular area they want to go into, but for whatever reason they're seen as overqualified.
Yes, it is the damnable thing about career management. Actually, you're exactly right. Sort of in the early days, you haven't got enough experience, so people tell you, but that's not true because you have experience. And fast forward 20, 30 years, you're now suddenly overqualified. And it's like, well, how did that happen? I'm just building my career. Wait, what? So for sure, it's a dilemma. And for me, I got to this point in my career as well. You feel like you're hitting that, well, wait, this is what it's all been leading up to. This is all the experience that previous feedback or experience told me I needed to have, and now I've gone out there and got that, and now and always remember that when you apply for jobs, organizations have to give you some sort of a reason or some sort of feedback, and it can be code for we're just recruiting internally. It might just be they had somebody in mind all along, and there might be some HR personnel on the call now that might sort of shoot me for saying that. But
it's important to look at the reality of some situations, and I guess, yeah, getting feedback is really important, I think, in that case, and getting detailed feedback, particularly if, in an interview situation.
Yes, and you might, I mean, and I say that just to be transparent, that could just be the case. They might have just decided to recruit internally. If you are already that internal candidate, and it goes to somebody internally, and you think, well, that's not fair because I've definitely got more experience in this area. You feel you would have been the better candidate. Then it's again, events happen. This happens to everybody in their career at some point or other, and you have the choice of how you respond to that. And other ways to handle this are, well, is this a sign that I need to look at another way of, can I use this experience in another way? So, for example, if coaching and mentoring is something that appeals, why not use that experience to help the younger ones coming up in the, so say it's an organization, in the organization. If you feel that your experience would lend itself well to becoming a non-exec director and an ED, then maybe put on your LinkedIn profile that you're interested in a non-exec directorship. And maybe that experience would benefit people outside of your normal circle in a very different way. And you can get compensated for that, and it's on a, on an ad hoc basis. Or you can do it on a voluntary basis. It doesn't have to be compensated. If it's the feeling of, I've got the experience, I need to be able to do something with that somewhere, then those are a couple of instances or examples I can think of. And options that I've looked into. So hopefully that helps answer that question. Just how else can you use what you have? Because as my father always used to say to my sister and I when we were kids, watching the black and white movies on a Saturday morning on the telly with all the Hollywood love stories, and we just sit there drooling over them, and he would come in and say, well, the sooner you learn life's not fair. Harsh though that is, and we didn't understand that as 8-year-olds, but sometimes things don't quite work out. So always think of, again, just reframe it, think about how else can you apply that experience. And it may not be in the organization you're currently in, but if you supplement it by doing something else outside of work, or you move job, that could just be what it takes to help feel more fulfilled about what you do.
Thank you. And on that note, I think that's the end of the Q&A section.
Oh, wow.
So thank you so much for your time this evening, and thank you to the audience for kindly registering and signing up. There's just one note, there's a question about the recording of the LinkedIn webinar in terms of profiling and networking. Yes, it is available because we record a lot of our events, just like this one here. I would just recommend registering with the Student Hub or contacting the alumni team, and we'll be able to direct you to that as well. And just one final note, that Julie has kindly donated some of her books for the UWL library. So as part of being part of the alumni community, you'll have access to our library service. So I know there was a point about books to read and kind of further resource. So I think it's really important to say that Julie's kindly donated her time and some of her books as part of the alumni community. So thank you so much once again. I really hope that you found these conversations useful. Your feedback would be amazing directly to the team, and I look forward, and I hope you do sign up to a lot of the Alumni Engage events here. And don't forget that your career is not linear, and it is a journey, just like your life's a journey. So please do engage with us. You are still part of the community, you are still part of the university community, so please do engage with the alumni and the career services would probably be the final thought. Thank you all.
Thank you. Yeah, so thank you for all the great questions from attendees today as well.
Yeah,
that's
been
really lovely engagement. So thank you all.
Brilliant. Thank you so much all. Have a lovely evening. Take care.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.